Welcome back to Tech, Tesla, and Trends. Tonight, I'm returning to the multidimensional thought process and looking at what I consider Module 4, or reasoned principles and identifying bias in the system. So, part 1 of this is reasoned principles. And if you look at what Elon typically talks about, and he starts from first principles thinking, and there's several interviews where he goes into a lot more detail on this, but for now we're just going to look at starting your solution at the atomic level, which is understanding what the atoms are going to do, how they respond, how they bond, how they interact with heat and cool or cold, and all of the other aspects of reality. Remember reality. Some people like to believe there's no objectiveness, but there is. And in this case, it's very important to understand how these materials will interact as you're designing and solving problems. So the first part of this is that principle of understanding what you're working with. Next, and this one I shudder to state, but does physics agree? Contrary to what some people believe, you're not going to violate the laws of physics. It doesn't happen. Those are inviolate, and you're going to have to operate within those boundaries. So then you come to the next part of this. How do the chemical bonds and all the rest of that interact? And are we utilizing good chemistry? Chemistry matters, especially in batteries and in other, component level requirements, like creating new aluminum for, say, a rocket that needs to go into space. Wonder who's done that. And then utilize that same material for a Cybertruck. Imagine that. What a great idea. Space grade metal. A lot of us are looking at that going, ooh, hey, same stuff as a rocket. Yeah. So for those of you who think that the Cybertruck isn't going to be a thing, I'm willing to state right now it's going to be bigger than you think. And the Cybertruck is a beauty of design in its simplicity and its materials and the overall change in how it is assembled will matter and will add billions to the bottom line of Tesla. That's because this reasoned principle of how things are assembled and the molecules and the materials and how they all interact was considered from the very beginning of that design process for the Cybertruck. And out of that came the thinking that got us to the 4680 cells, and those are nearing a unimproved production run rate. They've already made several iterations and changes to it. In fact, I've heard the current version has been referred to as version 2. I don't know that version 2 is what ends up being the long-term production, but knowing how Tesla operates, they're going to continue to refine and improve, if not the battery, the machines that make the battery. And that's just going to be the way they operate, because again, they're thinking this through from not only the chemical properties of the battery, but how those batteries are assembled and how those materials interact. This is important to thinking in a fashion that is effective and profitable long term, which is what Elon does. He may not say he's a businessman. He thinks of himself as a technologist. But if you apply technology and first principles thinking, you're always going to find a way to be more profitable than anyone else because you are acknowledging reality. And that matters in the marketplace more than anybody can comprehend. You can pretend all you want that you're a dog or a cat. You're still human. That's a reality. It's what you think in your mind that is holding you back from whatever it is that is necessary to accomplish. The same thing applies within business. If you are applying principles of truth and how those are constructed, you are able to build materials and processes that are more effective than your competition every single day of the week, and you will be more profitable long term. So returning to these first principles, they always must agree with the laws of physics, chemistry, and overall at the atomic level. Now, part 2, getting into biases. Now, Elon's got a list of 50 biases that he published years ago and or said was a good start, and it bears reading through. There's a lot to learn, and you'll find that even if you have studied human bias in the past, you will find it in your mind still today. It is incumbent upon us as we think to master ourselves and to learn how to eliminate bias where we can, and to recognize faulty logic that is part of the process. And again, this comes into making that process of thought better, those reasoned principles. So by identifying our biases, we're able to also find the logic holes that exist within our thought process and our creative processes as well. So are people following step 1 is one of those questions that is important to ask. From a bias perspective, are we focused on it? Are we assuming that appealing to one higher authority or some other are we trying too hard to impress those around us, or some other details about life that we don't want to address, or we want to make an argument that's a straw man for proving that we're smarter than somebody else? When you're working through solutions, none of those biases provide that path to solution, and they actually get in the way, and they cost companies money. The next item within that bias analysis is, are there known biases in your process? Is there a certain thinking pattern that exists within the individuals who brought the solution forward? We all know people who have one form of bias or another that is baked into their being, and perhaps they're not willing to admit that that's part of their life. And when they have that, it does not falsify the solution that they may bring forward. That is another one of those logic biases, or one of those fallacies, I should say, in believing that because somebody has a fallacy in their argument, that somehow their argument is false. That's not right. It just doesn't work. Just because somebody may be wrong in one area does not falsify their overall solution. And Many of many of the folks on the internet that are out there criticizing Elon on one item or another, assuming that he's not as smart as he actually is, and in time they'll be proven wrong. And yes, he makes mistakes. That's normal. That's human. And he corrects them as quickly as he is aware of them. That's, I've watched this for a very long time, and that's exactly the process that I've observed him walk through multiple times. Make a mistake, correct it. Figure out how to not make that mistake again. The next item in that bias process is, are there givens that were unquestioned in that step one? Are there items within our thinking process that we didn't question, we assumed? And the reason for that is sometimes the information we have been given may be out of date. And that, it's important to recognize that we are building upon information that came from a previous generation in most instances. Some of that information is wrong. I think in medicine, the statistic I've heard is that 50% of what a doctor knows at the time they graduate and begin practicing medicine is wrong. The only problem is they don't know which half. So in any other endeavor, I would add that there is a likelihood that that is also the case within those disciplines as well. No matter how well researched or how well we think we understand it, we are still discovering things every day as we research and move forward. And this particular instance is our particular checkpoint in looking at bias and our decision process is a point that should not be overlooked, because what we don't know that we don't know actually can hurt us. And if we are assuming that everything we think we know is correct, there's a good possibility we are hurting ourselves by what we think we know that is wrong. The final point that I have in the bias column for analysis is how we work through step one, which is the starting at the atomic level, and does physics agree and chemistry agree, and are we reasoning from first principles? That all kind of rolls together, but are we somehow misunderstood or applying a bias in that process? And as long as we have worked through and questioned that which needs to be questioned at each step, again, like with the overall process, rapid iteration, test, implement, iterate, and implement again, and work your way through until you come to a solution that is viable. This matters. This is reasoning and utilizing our understanding of bias and removing that from our process, and together in that process it creates a stronger reasoning and logic, and the solutions that we are able to arrive at have more power because they are based in a reality that is tested and clearly understood. So I'd love to hear some more of your thoughts on this. I know some of this I'm trying to summarize, and it's really hard to actually do that in a short, keep it under 15 minutes method, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on these, especially in steps 1 and 2 there with the atomic level and bias analysis. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So let's touch base in the comments and we can work through that down below. For now, hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll follow up with you tomorrow. Have a good night.